Either we are there or not, ITSPmagazine still gets the best stories. There are plenty of conferences and all sorts of events that spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, we sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Marco.
Sean.
I think it's time for the community to get together again.
Yes.
So we had, RSA earlier in the year. We had a great hacker summer camp mid-year. We had InfoSec Europe mixed in there in the summer. And I know Black Hat Europe is coming in a few weeks, actually, a couple weeks. And
you know where it is?
It's the same place that we were at before. It's Excel London.
I wonder, have you ever left? Have you ever left? Are you still there?
I'm still there. I'm still there. But you know who's going to be there? And they have a cool, many things they're going to be doing, but one of the coolest spots one of the coolest events. That's the keynote on Thursday, and that is Joe Sullivan. For those watching, you've already seen Joe on screen. You haven't heard him speak yet. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
And it's going to be a great conversation. And just to make it clear, Black Hat Europe, that's what we are covering with this conversation, December 4th to the 7th at the Excel, where InfoSecurity was. And so that's why we made a joke, because we were there.
Right. Exactly. I don't think we're going to make it to Europe or to London for this particular event, but we do get to connect with everybody that has cool things to say. And someone who has really cool, but even more important things to say is Joe Sullivan. Joe, congrats on getting the keynote speaking spot there. Well earned for those who know kind of some of the things you've experienced and the path that you've taken to arrive at today and to get to that spot on the stage. For those who may not be familiar with you, a few words, if you might, just how you entered the field, some of the things you've done, and basically an arrival to the Black Hat keynote, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So I started in security back in the 90s. I was a U.S. federal government employee, and I was the person who in 1995 pushed the Department of Justice to let me have a direct internet connection in my office. I soon after became one of the first federal prosecutors in the United States who was prosecuting cybercrime. I was doing that actually from Las Vegas U.S. Attorney's Office. I moved to Northern California. Robert Mueller, who right before he became the head of the FBI, was the U.S. Attorney for Silicon Valley for Northern California. And he wanted to have a dedicated high-tech crime prosecution unit. And I was lucky enough to be one of the founding members of that unit. So we were the first team who got to just full-time prosecute high-tech cases, sitting in Silicon Valley, working most of the time hand in hand with the different tech companies in the Valley. It was my job to essentially go to the companies and say, tell us about the cybercrime, let us help you. I'm from the government, I'm here to help. That led to a lot of interesting and rewarding cases. I even got to work on the digital evidence side of the 9/11 investigation, along with a lot of other more traditional cyber type cases that we've seen ever since. I then moved to eBay to take over and run their e-crime fraud team. And also I managed their policies around what was allowed for sale on eBay. So got to deal with a lot of first of their kind issues. And at eBay, I spent, I racked up a lot of mileage flying around the world, training governments and law enforcement on how to do investigations on the internet and deal with cybercrime. And and spent a lot of time trying to convince government agencies to partner in partnership with companies to keep the customer safe. And governments weren't investing a lot in cybersecurity back then or protecting people online. So it was a bit of an uphill battle. Did that at eBay, went over to the PayPal side of the house for a couple of years, and then eventually in 2008 went over to Facebook. Joined Facebook when we were smaller than MySpace, and stayed through the IPO and to a company with over 1 billion customers after I was there for when we acquired Instagram, we acquired WhatsApp, we acquired Oculus. So I lived through all of those experiences. As the chief security officer of the company, I built the security team there from probably half a dozen people to hundreds. And then in 2015, I started thinking it was getting a little quiet at our big company. We had security under control. I didn't have the crystal ball to see the 2016 election and Cambridge Analytica and the things that came after my departure. But it turns out that it didn't stay boring for long there. But I jumped in 2015 over to Uber because it was what I thought the biggest security train wreck of a company. They had, in 2014 had gone through just about every possible negative public security incident you can imagine. A really tragic sexual assault case in India that was global news, stories in the United States about insiders at the company looking up information about customers that they shouldn't be looking at, including even tracking reporters coming to the office for interviews. The company's reputation was in shambles. And then to top it off, at the end of, I think, 2014, they announced a major data breach. So outside the news, they also had a massive fraud problem. We're losing money madly. The company was valued at $40 billion already. So jumped in there and built a security team from about half a dozen again up into hundreds and hundreds. There I oversaw physical security, fraud, rider and driver safety, so safety of anyone in the car, around the car, in the public. Hired a chief information security officer under me, so I had InfoSec, investigations, anything at all security related. That was kind of my job. That didn't end well, unfortunately. Was in the spring of 2017, our CEO stepped down, and those of us who were underneath him reporting to him, we became co-CEOs of the company for a few months. So I got to experience being co-CEO with 9 other people, which I don't recommend. It's hard to get 9 people to agree on anything. And then we hired a new CEO along with the board, and then he fired me in the fall and labeled me as someone involved in a cover-up. I kind of landed on my feet in spring of 2018, went on to join Cloudflare. Well, it was a small private company, and was very fortunate to be able to work with them for 4 years up until last October, and maybe a little more than 4 years total. Got to see them grow up into a really amazing security company that probably more than 20% of the internet's traffic goes through right now, and got to learn a ton from the leadership team there. And I left there last October. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit that's focused on humanitarian aid to Ukraine now. I spend about half my time doing that. In fact, next week, I'll be going to Europe a week before Black Hat. I'll be spending a week in Ukraine, bringing over and delivering a bunch of laptops to kids who are stuck in remote schooling, getting them set up, kind of holiday gifts for the kids over there to get them excited about remote learning. It's hard on them in a war zone. We also bring medical equipment and stuff like that over to help people who are kind of stuck there. And I also do some security consulting and advising on the side these days.
Wow, Joe, I feel like you just gave me the history of being a CISO and cybercrime in 5 minutes, like the history of the world. So I'll be honest, I don't even know where to start, but I do have a point that I made a note at the beginning when you were you say you were walking into company before you went to eBay and say, representing the government, and say, how can we help? I put that as a highlight, that quote right there, because I feel like from that day or that period or that intention, it seems that now the picture it's a little bit different than how can I help. So am I going somewhere with this maybe?
Yeah, I know exactly where you're going. I mean, the one thing I didn't mention in that very long bio narrative that I just gave was, the fallout from my time at Uber was that in 2020 I was charged with obstruction of justice and misprision of a felony by the U.S. Attorney's Office that I used to work at. So the head of the office was a former peer, and that was a pretty strange experience to be. I used to sit at the prosecutor table, and then I switched over to sit at the defendant's table, and so I had to live through criminal case. We went to trial. I lost. And last May, we had a sentencing hearing, and the judge, the government had been arguing, along the same thing that Uber had said, that I'd done a cover up. The judge said that the NDA and the work that my team did. The judge said the team's work was outstanding, that the NDA was not a cover up, and he rejected the government's request that I be sentenced to prison. And so I'm a probation doing community service, like the work that I do in Ukraine. Which I was doing before the judge sentenced it. But so I think a lot about, and have spent a lot of time thinking about the dynamic between the public and private sector. I mean, to me, it was the biggest irony of my life that the thing that I've spent more than 25 years championing, getting the public and private sector working together, I'm the poster child for not doing it right in the eyes of the government right now. And that's part of what I said to the judge at my sentencing hearing. I was the last person to speak before he issued the sentence. I said, if you don't send me to prison, I don't know if I said if you don't. I said, if given the chance, I will go out and talk to everybody I can about how we can do this better. We need to do this better. The government and the private sector need to work together. The reality is neither will succeed unless we're working together. There are real bad guys on the internet. I don't know if bad guys is the right word. Threat actors, nation states that are trying to take advantage of the West, cyber criminals who are trying to make money, kids trying to mess things up for kicks. They're all out there, and unless the security people inside our companies and the security people inside our governments work together, neither of us is going to be strong enough alone to get the job done, because there's something fundamentally different. The more I think about it, the more I've come to appreciate historically the dynamic between the public sector and the private citizens. If we go back thousands and thousands of years and look at why did people bond together in communities, it was for common defense. And then we professionalized our defense with police and militaries and things like that. And we gave them a lot of power in our communities so that they would protect us from the world. And by and large, that's the way the model has operated for thousands and thousands of years. And it actually works because, in the physical world, you can have borders and boundaries, and you can put your military there, and then the people on the inside can feel safe. But the internet's different, because most of the internet is operated in private hands. And so the people in the government who are supposed to be protecting us, they're blind unless the people in the companies cooperate with them. And so that's why I always, when I wore the government hat and when I wore the private sector hat, that's why I thought we had to work together to protect people. And yeah.
So, Joe, I want to talk to you about the temperature, because there's been at least another high-profile poster hung And I think, yeah, it's been a while since I was kind of alluded to that it was going to happen. But
yeah,
I don't know. I've always thought, and I actually wrote a series on this, that the title of the series, blog series, is "Am I Wrong for Not Wanting to Be a CISO?" Because I always feel that there's this overwhelming pressure to only succeed, never fail, right? So there's just that level of pressure to begin with. And then when you start now having to deal with people against you, not just the threat actors, but people that are supposedly supposed to be on your side against you, that completely destroys the culture. Like, talk about icing a role, right? Can I use the word handcuff? Handcuff the person in the role to not want to do anything that might be seen as inappropriate or out of bounds or in some gray area, or miss something, even not even intentionally make a decision, but miss something. So talk to me about the temperature and the culture, and how you see we might raise it to a comfortable level where we're not icing that role like we are today.
Yeah, well, first, Sean, I'll say you're right. I spend a lot of time talking with security executives and security people inside companies. First, after I got fired from Uber in 2017, really through to my sentencing, I was invited and I spoke a lot with security leaders kind of in these closed door sessions, Chatham House rule type environments where they just wanted to know what happened to you and how do I avoid it happening to me? What are the lessons learned? They started getting, and so that was part one of the conversations. And then part two was I get so many of these one-off calls, either directly from someone I know or through an introduction. And it's like, Joe, I'm really nervous. I'm in a situation right now. I think I've learned about like 99% of the breaches that have made public news. I think I heard about them before they became public. And then I heard about 10 times those that you never heard of because I spoke with the security leader there. And the reality is every security leader in a crisis situation isn't only thinking about how do I navigate this for the company and our customers. They're worried about themselves and they're scared. And so that temperature was rising and rising over the last few years. And then what's happened with SolarWinds and Tim, the CISO from SolarWinds, being named in the SEC fraud lawsuit recently, it's gone like the panic has gone to like boiling level now, and there's a lot of anxiety and stress, and we have to. I think part of the problem is that the panic and stress that's happening in the security community inside the companies is not public enough. I don't think the people inside the government, I think everybody on every side wants the right things. I think that the people inside the government, they want to protect people and make sure that people are safe on the internet. And the people inside the companies want the same thing, but neither side understands the other. And so we need more transparency and visibility, and we need to talk about ways to diffuse this heat and get the sides to understand each other, where they're coming from. And, I keep saying someone has to do it. And I guess I told the judge that I would do it. And so here I am.
And the big problem, I think, is where you start. Before we started recording, I thought about the fact that there are other roles in our society that if you do that job in fear, you're probably not going to do the job right. And then in particular, we talk about the medical profession and how everybody expects you to be perfect, but still like be innovative, do the best that you can, and have eyes pretty much 360 all over and even on top of your head. And you're just not allowed to make mistake. But if you think about that, you're probably not performing at your best. And there gotta be a safety net, I think, for this. And one thing that you mentioned at that point is the fact that you don't go into cybersecurity for the glory. You do because you want to be useful. You want to fight crime. And this could be also a perception in the news that I think sometimes they just push the negative conversation. So maybe a couple of points of perspective from you on this.
Absolutely. I think we all at different points in our career reach these forks in the road. And I had one of those. At a certain point, I was at a path. I had been a lawyer and I was working inside tech companies. And I was getting recruited to go be a general counsel of companies. And I chose a different path. I chose security instead and hung up that lawyer, I put away that lawyer degree and focused on managing engineers and playing defense as a team because it felt so much more rewarding to me. And I liked the people I was working with. I mean, put aside that engineers are much easier to manage than lawyers. That's a joke story for another day. But when you work in security, you feel like you're surrounded by mission-oriented people. I spent the first 8 years of my career in government service. I went into government straight from school. And at the time, I thought I would stay in government my whole career. And my whole career I always wanted to be focused on helping people and doing things that felt mission-oriented and rewarding. And I love working around people like that. You could sit at any security team inside any company in the world, and that's the passion. I mean, sometimes that passion we get in our own way because we're so security absolutist. And we butt heads a little too much with the other teams inside the company who are money absolutist. But usually we love our work because of that passion. And what we don't want is what has the potential to happen right now, and what I think is happening a little bit. I do know people who've stopped being security executives, who stopped being CISOs or CSOs because they said that the water I'm in is starting to boil a little too much, and I think I'd rather go be a consultant, or I'd rather go work at a startup in an engineering role, or I'd rather go just be on the outside. I mean, I know when you step away from the security when I stepped away from the security executive role at Cloudflare last year, I mean, I felt two weights lifted off my shoulders. The first was the responsibility. You're the person inside that company who has the responsibility to make sure that the company doesn't get hacked and all your customers hurt. That's a heavy responsibility, and that's heavy enough. Like, that's a weight that a lot of people are happy and willing to take on because of the mission, because of the responsibility is a good responsibility. But I also felt a weight go away when I stepped away because I knew I was not going to be in a situation where I would be second guessed. And that is a what I think my job now is partially about, and why I'm looking forward to doing these talks at Black Hat and wherever anyone else will invite me to speak, is because I think we need to get people to understand that having that pressure, like, we want people to take that first pressure on and do it well and run with that weight. And we want the strongest people to take on that weight because they'll carry it the furthest and the best. But if we don't deal with that second issue, people aren't going to choose to play the sport.
So let's talk about all the things you're doing at Black Hat in London. 3 days, 3 different activities, culminating on the third day with your keynote. So we'll end there. Talk to us about the other 2 events or activities that you're involved with. And I really want to know, I'm thinking from security executive, security leader, maybe even practitioners aspiring to sit in that role, but might have concerns. What are those activities, conversations, presentations about? What are you going to say? What are you going to hear? What's the objective for each of them?
Yeah, like, one of my goals is to learn as much as I share every time I get out there. And like, the reason I like going to conferences like Black Hat, and I've been going to Black Hat in Vegas for forever, and I'm excited to go in London for my first Black Hat Europe to get to know that community in Europe a little better. I've done lots of security events in Europe and keynoted conferences in countries across Europe and managed teams across Europe, but I missed that. I haven't had that chance in a bit, and I want to learn how it's going over there in terms of the pressure that I'm learning so much about, that people who are in the role right now are feeling in the United States and other places. And I want to compare notes and all that. So yeah, 3 days. One of the things that Black Hat does really well is they put on an exec summit in Las Vegas for Black Hat USA. It's called the CISO Summit, and in Europe it's called the Exec Summit. And it's the thing that when I was a baby CISO, when I was first running security at Facebook, I felt so out of my depth. As a security leader, it's a really, really lonely position. You are supposed to look to the exec team and the board like you've got it all figured out. You're there, you're the person who's the top expert in the company on security, so you can't show weakness to them. And then you're managing a whole team of security professionals, and they all look up to you, and you're the leader, and you're supposed to inspire them, and you can't show weakness to them. So who do you turn to ask questions? How do I do a better job communicating to the board? How do I do a better job fighting for resources? How do I do a better job making sure that I'm prioritizing the right things? Where should I be proactive versus reactive? The CISO community is amazing in that regard. We all have leaned on each other. I have so many mentors, and I've tried to give back as much as, and so the best thing that I could ever do as a security leader was go to something like the Black Hat Exec Summit and get in the room with my peers and say, oh, you know what I'm struggling with today? This. And then they'll be like, oh, here's how I solved that. It's so incredibly valuable. And it's a different conversation than happens, in front of all of the teams, because it's where the leaders can be vulnerable. And so the first thing I'm doing in London this year is I'm going to spend a full day at that exec summit, and I'll be one of the keynote speakers there. And I'll talk about the cases and the stuff we're talking about, but specifically with the lens of the security leader as an individual. How can they think about these things? And in that environment,
Chatham House rules environment where you can share freely, and what happens in that room stays in that room, and likewise, the other people in there can share with you as well, and each other.
Yeah, and what happens in that room is amazing, because it's not one person standing there talking at everybody. It's a room full of experts. It's the people who are at the top of the profession, and there's not a person in the room who doesn't have a valuable perspective. And so it's, I spark the conversation by standing up on the stage, but I want to be there for the whole day, because then when I get off the stage, it's all the little conversations that'll happen the rest of the day into the evening with those people that will be the most valuable parts of it. And so that's day one. I mean, that's what I did. I did a version of that for Black Hat USA. And I think that went so well this summer that the leadership team from Black Hat reached out and said, could you do a version of that as a main stage keynote for us? Because it just, everybody was just, like I said, it wasn't just me, it was the conversation. And so I enjoyed that so much. I was talking to the organizers of Black Hat Europe, and they said, well, we do this thing kind of like community sessions that are very interactive. And would you be interested in doing one? And I said, sure. And so that's the second day. I will have a community session It will be it'll be more informal. It'll be, it's kind of like I'll be in a room, and if people show up, we'll get together and we'll just kind of talk. And so that can be more like Q&A and dialogue. And I thought that was a good idea because I did a different talk at DEF CON this past summer. I talked about this case from the perspective of the security researcher and how we want to continue to promote security research. But after the session ended, so many people from the DEF CON community came over and wanted to talk that the goons, the security people from DEF CON, they literally went and grabbed a giant room next door and herded us all into it so that the next session could happen at DEF CON. And we ended up staying in that room and just talking for 2 hours. And so that's what I envision is going to happen on day 2. It's just, we're going to just have a conversation with the community. And I will learn so much because I don't get to interact directly with people as much as I would like to. And so that's day 2. And then I think probably at the end of day 2, I'm going to have to go and tweak my keynote speech for day 3 because I will have learned I will have learned so much from those 2 days. Like, I never like going to a conference and showing up, just walking up on stage and speaking. I always want to get to know the people that I'm going to be engaged with, because nobody wants a canned speech. Everybody wants something that's relevant for them. And I think by the time we get to day 3, and I get to do that keynote on the main stage, I'll be able to share back to the whole community, not just how I think about these issues, but how all of the executives in attendance think, and how a bunch of the people, from different angles of the security community are thinking about it. And then I will give a better talk because of those first 2 days.
You know what I'm thinking too, going back to you talking about standing in front of the board and everybody expecting you to be the person that knows everything, and also how may piss off a couple of people here, but I don't know if they really care to know how it works. They just want you to care about not getting in trouble, right? But in an ideal world, I would love for other C-level people to be at that keynote that you're about to give, so that you can kind of see things from the other perspective. It's called empathy, and probably it would help a lot of people to get there.
I think you're right. I've spoken at some events. Recently, I spoke at an event in Washington, D.C. It was a smaller group. It was a group of company leaders with their security executives. And all of the security executives wanted to come up to me afterwards and say, "Thank you for talking about this in front of my boss, because my boss needed to hear this." Yep. And I think we are at I think there's actually one of the things I will tell in the exec session on the first day. Right now is the right time for every security executive in every company in the world to go to their general counsel and say, we need to have an exec session and talk about what happened in the SolarWinds case and what happened in the Uber case, because of 2 things. Number 1, do you know what the judge said at my sentencing hearing? He said, "Where's the CEO and where's the company? I don't understand why the security leader is the only one here. It doesn't make sense to me." That's what the judge said at the sentencing. He didn't say it to me. He said it to the United States Department of Justice. He put them on the hot seat. He said, "Why didn't you charge them?" And I think that was a very clear message from the judge. And he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for all the judges. And I think he was also speaking for the public. And that was number 1. But number 2, with the SEC getting involved here in the United States in the SolarWinds case, they might have named the head of security in the action, but their message is also broader. The SEC isn't just coming at it with this one case. They've also, put a bunch of regulation in place that's about to kick in December that puts companies on notice that they need to be transparent about their investment in security. They need to be transparent about how much security skill they have on their board and so on. So I saw a scathing article this week talking about what's happened over at Clorox, where they had a security incident, and they're apparently, I don't know any of the close facts, but like just from reading it from a distance, it sounds like the CISO got fired and the board got a raise and the CEO got a raise, and people aren't happy about that. We also have the example of the Drizzly case where the CEO personally was named by the FTC. And we have the Yahoo case where the board was sued. So I think that, I think the temperature is changing, not just for the security leadership. It's going to be the rest of the company that's going to be held accountable. And honestly, from the standpoint of the CISO, that's the right thing. One of the things that the world doesn't, I think the world at large doesn't appreciate how hard the role of the CISO is and how limited your power is inside an organization. Mm-hmm. I believe if you stop 12 people on the street and said, hey, company X had a security problem and people got hurt, and they have a head of security, who should get fired? Everybody would say the head of security, right? Because it seems logical. But then what if you said, well, that person had been raising the red flag for the last 5 years, asking for more resources, not getting it. The company had a risk register and just listed all the things that the CISO was worried about, but didn't fix them. And the company does not, have world class in 7 out of 10 areas of security. Who should be at fault for that? It's not one person who has the security title, and so, but the world doesn't know that, and we have to scream more loudly. Me speaking at Black Hat's not going to raise awareness outside of the security community, but this is first step.
Yep.
I love it. And maybe as we wrap here, Joe, I want to give you the final word, because we started with collaboration between public and private, and you just mentioned that we need to have more transparency, and we talked about having a vision to work together to be partners in this, right? Not against each other. So what do you hope folks get from your time in all those sessions that you're doing from a public sector perspective?
Yeah, so I have 3 specific areas that I'm going to go deep on the recommendations that we just don't have time to get into here, and hopefully people will come to the events to hear these things. But I think there's a lot we can do proactively to prevent these worst case scenarios from happening. One of the best mentors and leaders I ever had, he was the COO at eBay back in the day. I went to him and I said, Maynard, I feel like every day all I do is put out fires, and my team is just drowning from putting out fires. And he said, if it's your team's job to put out fires, build a fire department. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you can go buy a fire department, and even while a crew's out putting out a fire, you'll see another crew's asleep and another one's polishing the engines. You staff it right, you structure it well, you plan for, you have ladders that are long enough for the tallest building in town. It's like you plan ahead, you be proactive, and then you can put out all the fires and your team won't burn out. Well, there's a lot we can be doing in security, and I've put together a lot of best practices, not just on my own from my experiences, but from talking to lots of people over these last few years. So I think there's a lot we can do to get ahead of this stuff. That's number one. Number two, I think we still have to assume the best, but prepare for the worst. And CISOs, security leaders, and even security teams have to have their own personal incident response plans. Like what I had to go through in terms of being fired and having my name plastered on the front of every newspaper in the world, and having to hire a PR person in multiple law firms in the middle of the night without a computer. I don't want anybody to go through that. But if you have to go through it, let me tell you how I would have done it a second, if I had to go through it a second time, because I'd be prepared, and then it wouldn't have as big an impact. negative impact. And then the third thing is, I think the most important is we have to fight through that, the anxiety, the desire to curl up in a ball. We have to actually stand up strong. We need to go walk over and talk to the government, put out our hand and say, let's work together. Let me tell you about what we're doing. Let me tell you about our struggles. Let me tell you about our challenges. And by the way, tell me about yours. Maybe we can help you too. And I have a bunch of ideas on that area too, because I don't want my case and Tim's case and others like it to stand for the end of cooperation. Because like we said earlier, we have to come together. We have to work together. And so what can we actually do to get to a better place? And there are lots of government agencies and private companies that are working well together, and we should celebrate that stuff and look at the best practices.
Yep. So to answer your question, Joe, what do we have to do? We connect with you in London at the Excel London for Black Hat, December 4th through the 7th. Join you if you're able to go. Not everybody is. If you're an executive and you're able to go to the exec summit, I definitely encourage you to. I had the privilege of attending one of those. Not certain how I got in, but anyway, I had the privilege of doing that. It's well worth the time. And of course, the community sessions. That's where a lot of real stuff happens as well. And I think you just teased out 3 super important things that security leaders and their teams and their executive leadership peers need to know about the role and being prepared. And so that's where I suggest everybody starts. December 4th through the 7th, Excel London, Black Hat Europe 2023. Joe, your keynote sessions Thursday the 7th, 9 a.m. there. And I expect a fully packed standing room only session there for you.
Yeah, because this may sound like, and look, if you're watching on YouTube, as a personal keynote session, but I know there is a lot more when you're going to actually deliver the keynote. So I definitely encourage everybody to go. And I want to thank you so much. Fascinating conversation, made me think a ton. And I'm hoping that our audience is going to think a lot as well. I'm sure they will.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks, everybody, for listening and watching. One of a number of sessions that we'll have here as we continue to cover Black Hat Europe 2023, still 2023, in London. And I think we've already recorded another one, and we have a bunch of other sessions lined up as well. And so stay tuned and share, attend the event, connect with your peers, have those conversations, and let's be better together. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of our on-location conversation. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.